What's the most scared you've ever been? When I was 19, I always tracked my period and knew when it was coming. And that September, I didn't get my period in time, or at all. And keep in mind, this was a week after my boyfriend at the time had dumped me, so I couldn't text him. Also, I didn't want to freak anyone else out, so I waited. That whole month, I was a little panicked, and when I didn't get it on the day I was supposed to the next month, I freaked. I jumped out of bed and made my way over to Target sobbing because I didn't want to have a child, much less the child of someone who had dumped me over text. The issue was the Target was on my college's campus, so I was constantly running into people I knew. I could play off the tears, but I could not play off buying a pregnancy test. So I wandered around the store for 30 minutes until that aisle was clear, and then I booked it to the tests. But as soon as I'm reaching, a 40-year-old man pops up beside me. I take a step back, pretending to scan my options, and he does the same. We're both just standing there playing chicken because neither of us want the other to see what we're gonna buy. Well, 2 minutes tick by, and thank goodness he reaches first. He grabs erectile dysfunction meds and all but runs out of that aisle. Then I grab my pregnancy tests and do the same. Now, it's probably a good time to mention I had never done the do. Like, if I was pregnant, this would have been the second immaculate conception. So the pregnancy test obviously came back negative because I'm not the second Virgin Mary. But I actually didn't get my period for 2 more months, and I found out that it was because of the stress of the breakup. This is me during my potential mommy phase.
What is the closest you've ever been to getting arrested? When I was 13, me and my friends decided that we were gonna stay up all night. I was moving away forever the next morning, so we had to make it a night that we'd never forget. Tragically, my town had a very strict curfew that you had to be home by 11 p.m. So duh, we were. We sat in my house, we watched some movies, until 1 a.m. when we knew my parents were asleep. Then we skirted out of there. But we were all very good girls and very worried about a police run-in. So every time we heard a noise, we would literally duck and cover. But by 4 a.m., we'd made it down every street in town and back to my front yard with not a single cop running. Well, this was 2013, and twerking was the thing to do, especially upside down wall twerking. So inevitably, one of my friends dared me to twerk upside down on the big oak tree in my front lawn. Now, a lot was riding on this twerk because it was gonna be one of their last memories of me. This twerk had to be legendary. I put my hands on the ground, feet on the tree, and shook what my mama gave me. And then, I froze, upside down, booty in the air as this cop jumps out of his car and storms my front lawn. What do you girls think you're doing? I very awkwardly got down from the tree and said, "This is our lawn, we're not trespassing." "Well, I don't care, you're distracting drunk drivers." Well, one of my friends was feeling very brave because she said, "Isn't it their fault if they're drunk driving?" That was all it took for him to go into threaten mode. "If you don't go in now, I'm gonna wake up your parents." No. He glared at us as we sprinted inside, and then he drove away. And we did stay up the rest of the night. We were just sobbing our eyes out and listening to the police radio for when they inevitably announced our life sentences, which they never did. Who is the scariest person you've ever met? This dude I had just met invited me over to his apartment and immediately pushes me onto this super high balcony. And I'm like, whoa! But he's like, look up. And I see this picture perfect view of downtown LA. And it should be like a moment, you know? But this man won't shut up about how he's obsessed with working out because of course he is. So I say, okay, well, tell me something about yourself that I wouldn't guess. He tenses up. He's like, well, I don't know if I should say this. I've never told anyone this before. And I am a nosy narwhal, so of course I was like, yes, say it. I hear voices from another dimension. Oh, but I'm quite spiritual, so that doesn't freak me out too much. Is it relatives or ghosts? No, I wake up with stand-up comedy sets in my head that the spirits write for me. Oh my gosh, what? He looks away all angsty, but you wouldn't like them. You're too Gen Z. For context, this dude was like 27. At this point, I think they're just kind of like cringy meme jokes, and I want to hear the spirit stand-up set, so I'm like, come on. He says, okay, this is a light one, and then proceeds to say the most offensive joke I've ever heard. I don't even want to hint what it was about, but it was just a genuinely disturbing, hateful joke that somehow insulted like 12 communities in one blow. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you can't say any of that. And immediately he flips a switch. He steps back from the railing and his eyes darken. See, I knew you wouldn't get it. Oh, you're just the woke police. At this point, I want to leave, so I look at my phone and pretend that my roommate is having an emergency and then get up to leave. But he blocks me in with his arm and I'm panicking because he's like really close. He rolls his eyes. Ugh, do you think I'm gonna throw you over the ledge or something? Which I didn't, but now I'm worried. He chills out a little bit and says, I just want you to know, I am not racist or homophobic. I just wake up with these jokes in my mind and they're so amazing, I have to share them. Eventually he let me leave when I promised to see him again, but I never did. What was the moment you realized you're an embarrassment to your parents? On the last day of 4th grade, I was scootering home from school and my mom was walking beside me. Well, we lived in this old town in Kentucky and there was lots of potholes in the sidewalk. And I would always pretend I was in Mario Kart and go over the holes specifically, pretending that they were those little arrows that made you go fast. We were right across
across the street from my house and I needed a speed boost because as soon as I got home, summer officially began. So I angled my scooter perfectly to hit this pothole. But my wheel got stuck in the pothole and I flipped over the handlebars. As I was flipping, it felt like the world was in slow motion. And I opened my mouth like, ah! Then I crashed to the ground and my front tooth hit the metal bar and snapped in half. Well, I had recently learned the F-bomb and now felt like a very good time to practice it. So I screamed, duck, duck, but with an F. Well, like I said, we were right across the street from my house, so my nice elderly neighbors were walking by, and this was a very small, wholesome town where not a lot of people just ran around screaming the F word. So everyone within earshot whipped their heads towards me, totally aghast. My mom's face is turning totally burgundy, and she's doing that tight-lipped mom expression like, It didn't help that she thought I had just fallen and that I was being overdramatic for attention. So she pulls me down the street like, shh, let's go. I'm being dragged along and I'm like, no, we have to go back. We have to save my tooth. So we backtrack and drop to the ground, digging around for the chipped piece. I have never seen my mom move that fast. She was truly scurrying because everyone on their porches were craning their necks like, what the hell is wrong with this kid? And she wanted to get out of there ASAP. Anyway, we finally found the tooth, but they could never reattach it, so most of this tooth is fake. And I still effing love the F word. Have you ever humiliated yourself in front of your crush? All of 4th grade, I was in love with this guy, Marty, but he was so cool and popular, I never had the courage to talk to him. The last week of school arrived, and I knew my final opportunity to impress him was my school field trip to our state capital, Frankfort, Kentucky. All night, I was panicking because I don't know anything about getting a guy to like me. So where does a 9-year-old find info on wooing her crush? Her big sister's totally off-limits 17 magazines, of course. Well, the page I happened to flip open to said only eat a light meal before a date, so that way you don't feel weighed down. And even though this field trip wasn't technically a date, it could end up being one, okay? So I took that little info nugget and ran. I woke up the next morning to a big breakfast my mom had prepared me, and I was like, no, I'm just gonna eat 2 pieces of watermelon. So I show up to the buses, stomach already growling, and immediately my plans were foiled. See, I had done my hair nice and put on all this perfume so I could sit in front of Marty and then he would fall in love with the back of my head. But the only open seat was right behind him, which sucked because I was already in love with the back of his head. Hello. Luckily, my bestie came and sat next to me, so I spent the whole 2-hour drive making really good jokes to her, hoping he would overhear how hilarious I am. Well, I don't know if I'm funny or just funny looking, but it worked. I was singing this YouTube parody about narwhals, and he turns around and goes, OMG, I love that song. Hello, are we about to kiss right now? My stomach starts doing flips, and wait, no, those aren't good flips. See, I get incredibly carsick, and there's 2 things that make it worse. Number 1 is bumpy buses, and number 2 is not eating enough. So as he's turned back looking at me, I blah right into the aisle, and it starts to slither up to his feet. Keep in mind, the only thing in my stomach was watermelon, so the puke is bright red. He takes one look at his feet and screams, everyone, Claire's puking blood! Pretty soon, the whole bus is panicking. You guys, Claire is dying! And just like that, I knew Marty would only ever see me as the girl who threw up blood.
What's the most freaked out you've ever been? On the last week of school, my bio teacher announced that we were doing dissection. And I came in the day of to find not frogs, but massive rats. Something about me is that I love rats. One time there was one in my house and I named it Potato and just let it live there for a little bit. So within 5 minutes of getting into the door, I hatched a plan to get out of the dissection. I walked all emotionally up to my teacher's desk and started sniffling.
My hamster died, and these rats remind me so much of her. I'm traumatized.
Which technically wasn't a lie. My hamster had just died 8 years ago.
Honey, I am so sorry about your hamster. You go into the hallway and I'll get you an alternate assignment.
It turns out nobody had refused to do a dissection before, so the assignment she gave me was very easy.
And I spent the whole week watching movies on my laptop in the hall. So it's the best week ever until on Friday she pops out into the hall and says, hey Claire, you're gonna have to take a test on the rat anatomy, which I had never seen.
I had 5 minutes to cram, so I googled rat body parts and hoped for the best. And I strutted into the room actually feeling quite confident until one big thing tripped me up. The cut open rats were laying legs up stiff on the tables in front of me. And I don't know if you've ever smelled formaldehyde, but to me it smelled like sweet tarts of death. I'm so freaked out that I immediately start sobbing, and I don't know where my teacher's empathy for my dead hamster went because she says, suck it up, Claire, and take the test. My tears are smudging all the writing on the paper, and there's no way that I'm getting above an F on this test. So I spent my last ever hours of high school internally freaking out while pretending to celebrate with my friends. But then I later found out that I got an 100 on the test. Thank you, rats, for smiling down on me.
I have a theory that how you act under insane pressure is your true self. I grew up in the kind of subdivision where I knew everyone except for whoever lived in this big house that no one ever came out of. And every time I asked a grown-up about them, they'd say, oh, the Millers live there. Be a good girl and don't go over there.
So of course I went over there.
Knock, knock, knock. And the door opens to 12 pairs of eyes staring at me. It turned out they were a huge extended family of siblings and cousins, and their parents would leave them home alone all day because the oldest was 18 and could look after them. Within seconds, I knew exactly why the grown-ups had been gatekeeping the Millers. This family was cooler than any of us ever could be. See, I grew up surrounded by organic applesauce, you can only watch PBS types of moms. But these kids had Heelys, they would watch Nickelodeon and cram cheese balls in their mouths, and pretty soon I was spending every day there. And I know at this point you're like, why did your parents let you do that? They didn't. I was actually living a double life. I would spend all day eating junk food and playing there, and then I would be home to eat my broccoli casserole by 8. Well, it was a super gossipy neighborhood and rumors were spreading, so my friends were hounding me for the tea on the Millers. And baby Claire was not a gatekeeper, so the next day I grabbed my best friend, and when I knocked, she was right there with me. She was immediately welcomed into the fold, and I was like, see how awesome the Millers are? That is, until we played hide and seek. I had a sick hiding place in a tree, so I thought that I was the last to be found, but when the 10-year-old Miller kid found me, he escorted me to the front yard where all 12 kids were assembled. Hey, we saw your friend hiding under the trampoline, but it would be so funny if we just pranked her and left her there. Crap, I didn't want to be uncool in front of the coolest kids I'd ever met, but I was 7 and my bestie was only 5, and I knew that she'd be panicking under there. It's fine, I'll go save her, but I'll play it cool. But when I came back to the front yard, the Millers looked annoyed, and I knew I was on thin ice. And of course, my bestie, bless her heart, had to say, I know you guys left me, you're mean. Up until that point, I had been flattering, worshipping the Millers, so I had never seen them provoked, but apparently that was all it took to set them off. We're not mean, you're just a baby. Both of you are ugly, and no one likes you. No one insults my bestie, so I fought back as aggressively as I could. And pretty soon, it was an us versus the Millers screaming battle, so loud that all the neighbors came into their front yards to watch. And naturally, my bestie and I were losing because we were 2 to 12, so I knew I had to employ my secret weapon. I'm the youngest in my family, so I've spent my whole life practicing my fake cry, and in this moment with the Millers, boy did I fake cry. And pretty soon my mom was running out to the Millers' front yard. What are you doing here? What did they do to you? Are you hurt? I couldn't get any words in edgewise, and my mom just scooped me and my bestie up and took us home. I felt like such a lame baby, and after that I knew I would never be as cool as the Millers, so I never went over there again.
Have you had that one teacher that wants to ruin your life?
My sister went to the same high school as me, and she warned me about this one specific science teacher.
But I was confident I could win her over because I'd never had a teacher not like me before. But from day one, this teacher would mark off the tiniest things if I didn't show my work exactly how she wanted. And my grade was suffering. So one day when we got this test back, I asked 2 of my friends if I could compare my work to theirs. Well, both friends had showed their work exactly as I did, and neither of them had any points marked off. So at the end of class, I brought all 3 papers up to my teacher and asked her what was up. "We can't talk about this here," she hissed. "Come in tomorrow before school and we'll discuss it." Well, at 6 a.m. the next morning, her room had some kids studying in it. So she led me into the chemistry supply closet so we could speak in private. It was very cramped, and I didn't know why we had to be so secretive, but I kept my mouth shut. "I do see what you mean about the points," she told me. "So can you fix my test grade?" She lets out the most dramatic sigh. "Claire, you are a bean counter. Why do you care about your grade so much?" I was dumbfounded. Why did I care about my grade? But just then, a student from the classroom called her to help with a problem, and she left the supply closet. "Stay here," she said, and she closed the door. And then I heard the click of a lock. I was too scared to move at all and check the door handle myself, but for all I knew, I was locked in that supply closet. I was very stressed and very scared, and the room felt way too tight, so I started crying. As I was praying for the door to open back up, it finally did. But she took one look at me sniffling and rolled her eyes. "Claire, do you know why you're like this?" "Like what?" "A bean counter. I mean, I'd assumed that it was pressure from your parents, but I didn't have any of these problems with your sister." I don't know." After that, she let me go, and she did fix my grade for that test. But I could never bring myself to speak to her or really participate in that class again.
This is me during the Teacher from Hell era.